the actual live. Welcome everyone to this panel discussion. Apologies, there's a church bell ringing in the background. Just one chime, I think, for now. So welcome everyone to this wonderful panel discussion on high velocity IT, possibly the best panel we've ever put together. We're going to be talking about high velocity IT organizations in general, but we're also going to be talking about this wonderful book and some of the guidance that's been written in this book. Yes, I can see Simone also has her copy at hand. Mark, of course, is wearing a t-shirt with the copy of the book on the t-shirt. Alan's letting the side down. No, but we've got a wonderful panel for you today. We've got possibly the best panel we've ever put together, and I'll go in order of how they appear on my screen. So first we have Simone Jo Moore. Simone is a coach and a consultant helping organizations along their digital journey, blending business and technology approaches, blending various frameworks. She's also an amazing speaker at various conferences that I've been privileged enough to attend. And I think when we do return to a post-vaccine world, when we're able to start traveling again, if she does appear at a conference near you, I think you really do owe it to yourself to make the time to go to that conference and listen to her. The next up on my screen is Mark Smalley, who is the lead editor of the ITIL for High Velocity IT book. Outside of his work with ITIL 4, Mark likes to be known by a bit of a tongue twister, so I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong. The IT paradigm. See, I'm already messing it up. Paradigmologist. Is that close enough of a pronunciation?
Yeah, it's close enough. Yeah.
Mark's been involved with behind the scenes as an author, as a contributor in many ways to several frameworks, including ITIL 4, but also a lot of work with AISL, BISL, BSI, and I'm sure several others that I can't think of off the top of my head. And last but certainly not least, is someone who isn't part of the ITSM community, the core ITSM community, but we welcome his contributions to a High Velocity book, as well as expanding our ways of thinking and writing about ITSM for the modern IT organization, and that is none other than Alan Kelly. He's an agile guide working with organizations, teams, and software professionals to help them along their agile transformation or their agile adoption journeys. He writes a lot, as well as advising and coaching and training. His blog posts are brilliantly written. They are long reads, but you come away with just such a massive wealth of information. And he's a real pleasure to work with. His blog can be found at alankelly.net, ALLAN, Alan, and Kelly is KELLY. Alankelly.net is the website, and alankelly.net/blog is the blog site. So let's talk about high velocity organizations. It's a phrase that's been thrown around quite a bit, more so in recent years than previously. And I think it would help the audience who are perhaps unfamiliar with that phrase if we were to start by defining that phrase, if you will. Alan, you probably work most closely on a day-to-day basis with a lot of teams calling themselves high velocity teams. How would you describe a high velocity organization? Nothing you right in the deep end.
You are. It's one of those things. I'm gonna kind of duck the question. I'm gonna give that kind of, but is it art question? It's easier to know when they're not a high velocity team than when they are a high velocity team, and I think an awful lot of people who wouldn't normally consider themselves on a high velocity team experienced it, at least momentarily, in March this year, when suddenly their organizations did what their organizations would have spent years planning to do and put all these people remote. That's not to say we want to live under that kind of stress all the time, and we certainly don't want that crisis. But in IT, there are occasions and there are teams who really can make a difference. You hear stories about like Amazon, and Amazon on average release new software in 10 seconds. And I know teams that are making several releases to live a day. I know the vast majority of teams aren't like that. I know the vast majority of teams, sometimes you say to them, well, we do a release every 2 weeks, and their mind is blown. So I think a high velocity IT organization is an organization which, I'm not saying you change the world in 2 weeks, but you can, on a regular basis, show forward movement. There's a lot we could delve into there, but as a working definition, let's go with that.
So in that case, I guess that opens up a bigger question. And Simon, I'll come to you with this one. Are high velocity organizations necessarily software development organizations? Can you have high velocity outside of software development?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt that technology enables the organization. That is a given in today's context, I guess. When I think about what does high velocity mean, and when we think about it, it just means that we can act or move, or we're capable. I think that's the other choice, because we don't have to be high velocity, I think, but it gives us the capability to move quickly in the markets when we need to. So, I mean, there's an old phrase, being able to turn on a dime. in other words, we literally have to have such a small turn radius in the way in changing in the directions in which the business wants to move. So whether it was a trigger because of a marketing issue, whether it was because there was this huge innovation and quick, I've got to get it there before someone else does, but for me, that is the high velocity side of it, most definitely. And things can come quite to a head for those that aren't quite used to the spin, not quite in the zone of wanting to have that sense of speed, if you like. But that's where I see the technology that sits underneath it. There's got to be a marriage there or a partnership, quite a deep relationship in order to enable the organization to do that.
And Mark, I think a couple of the things that Alan and Simone were saying reminds me of our initial scoping discussions. There were two things that stood out, which are very relevant to what we're just talking about here. I think you pointed out that in physics, velocity is not just speed, but it's also direction, and that's what a lot of people tend to miss. It's not necessarily about how quickly you're developing software, how quickly you're reacting. It's also about how quickly you're able to change direction as needed. And going back to what Alan was saying, there was, I think perhaps this was a tongue-in-cheek suggestion from yourself, but I think at one point you were asking whether we could call this book higher velocity IT rather than high velocity IT, if you recall. So when you started working on this book, what was going through your head as the new lead editor for this project? How would you what were you looking to solve? What were you looking to write?
No, it's good to recall that high velocity. The trouble with, for me, the title was a given for our audience. High velocity IT was what AXELOS decided to call the book, and it's a great title for marketing purposes. It's short and sharp and punchy. If you look at it in a more nuanced way, you could say that if there's high velocity, there's therefore low velocity, and then you say, well, high is good and low is bad. Well, of course, that's not the case. So it's a spectrum. It's just like you have a goods service continuum. You're somewhere on a spectrum, and the kind of organizations that we're targeting, trying to help, are the organizations, we call them in the book, digitally enabled organizations, the kind of organizations that use technology to do things significantly differently, or even do significantly different things because technology enables them to do it. So that's that's kind of the market we're looking at. Just occurred to me, talking about velocity in terms not only of speed but direction, doing the right things. The old really old parable of the three stone cutters. I'm sure some people have come across before, but many not. Guy comes across three stone cutters. Asked the first one, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm earning a living. That's what I do. How I make my make money for my family." He moves on to the second one. He said, "I'm trying to become the best stone cutter in the country." I really focused on the technique of stone cutting. Comes to the third one who stares off into the distance, and he says, "I'm building a cathedral." And there you've got that velocity, doing the right thing. And it's going back to Peter Drucker, the famous management guru, 1954, who published a bit in one of his books on the stonecutter thing. He said, the first and the third, they're good guys. It's the one in the middle you've got to watch out for. He's somebody who's possibly so much focused on the technique that they forget the context of what they're supposed to be doing. So, and I think we could translate, if you talk about who's the book for, it's not really for the specialized technician who's doing a great job on the specialized part of IT service management. It's for the person who's looking at the bigger picture, looking at the making the right kind of investments in the first place, and at the end of the chain, ensuring that value is co-created, that people actually get something out of this. So it really is about the big picture, and that's the assertion I'd like to make with the book, that if you work in an organization that relies on technology highly, so digitally enabled, and if you're prepared to unlearn your current way of working and adopt new ways of working in how you do things, then high velocity is a great, IT is a great place to start your thinking in terms of improvement in that area.
So I'd like to throw the same question to Alan, but perhaps slightly controversial spin here, because we know either from personal experience or through reading a lot of the thought leadership and other literature out there right now that service management is a bad word in some circles, which makes it doubly interesting for me that you graciously gave us some of your time and energy to publishing some of this guidance. So I'd like to ask you this elevator pitch question as well, because you work with teams outside of our traditional ITSM bubble, if I can put it that way. What is your elevator pitch to those teams? Why should they invest their energy to pick up a copy, read a book? You're on mute.
One of us had to do it. I'm going to ask, I'm going to assume that we haven't got any very young people on the call. And for many of us, certainly my age and Mark's age, if we think back, and I hope some of you remember this, there used to be a thing called a Littlewoods catalogue in the UK, or Great Universal Stores. I know this was the Sears catalogue in the US and other places, you know, and once or twice a year, this 1,000-page printed glossy catalogue would come to your aunt's house. It was always your aunt, and it would get passed around the family. And people would decide they wanted these shirts and those pants. And of course, those kids were always looking at the toy section. And you'd decide what you want, and you'd fill in a form, and you'd post it with a check or postal order. And it would go in, and at some stage in the future, some random date, these goods would come to you. Did you all remember that? Yeah.
Oh, that's AliExpress, isn't it?
Well, maybe not Ali. This is Amazon, and to some degree, it is Ali. You know, this is the way we used to do things. And if you think about it, Amazon and Ali is a slightly different model, but for a lot of us, it's the same thing. That's the same business model. There is a catalog. The Amazon catalog is online, and you can peruse it, and you can put in your form, and you can make your payment, and the payment happens over credit card, and the whole thing's electronic. Those old catalogs, they got updated what? Once, twice a year? How often does Amazon update their catalog? You know, it's happening all the time. There's so many different retailers there, and we live in a world now where when we go digital, and I'm sorry, but I think those of us in technology, we sometimes don't realize how significant this word digital is. We've been close to digital technology all our lives. We don't realize that when other people say digital, they mean their world is like our world. And Amazon's come along and it's taken that catalog shopping model. It hasn't just put a rocket under it. It hasn't just put it on steroids. It is the same model, but it is so much faster. And it is so well integrated. You don't normally need to contact the Amazon help desk. How often have you ever contacted the Amazon help desk? They try their damnedest for it not to exist. Was it Bezos says, great service is not needing to call the service desk. But when you do, my God, they're good. They actually fix problems. And the whole thing is integrated. It's not just they've taken an existing business model and supercharged it out of this universe, but everything else fits together. And that's what we're getting towards there. We need to see this. That's the whole picture. There's no longer a divide between the business and the technologists. And within the technologists, there's no longer a divide between, you see with the DevOps movement, what we used to call operations and the developers, and the divide between what we used to call a service desk and the developers and the business, that's disappearing too. Your business is the technology, your business is delivered through technology, and the technology is the business. And that's why we all need to care about it.
Yeah, good answer. So that leads on to, that's a good segue to a broader question. And Simone, I'll come to you with this one. again, a lot of literature out there about how service management is no longer relevant in this digital age. What's your take on that? Do you think that service management is still needed, or is it a case of we need to supercharge ITSM, or is it more a case of we need to rethink ITSM? Where would you stand on it, or that ITSM is not needed at all? Which of these three?
Okay, so are we talking about IT service management or service management?
Well, let's start with service management and broaden out perhaps, because
the interesting thing
Simone,
is
Simone, I'm going to butt in here. Simone, forget about IT. IT is dead. It's digital. It doesn't matter whether there's technology in this or not. There's always technology.
I'll put it this way. There's always somebody's butt that's got to get kicked somewhere for something not working, right? So there will always be a need for somebody to be managing it. Notice that, not IT, it, whatever it may actually be. And I come from a business perspective in this because absolutely it still matters. I would challenge any organization to show me when it hasn't needed to manage a service, regardless of what that service is. So if you've got one, we still need to do that. And I think one of the issues here is, as Mark was saying, the way we actually think about our business models. And with what Alan was saying, I don't disagree at all with a lot of that, because there is a shift in the way that we're seeing how deeply embedded it is just a natural part of our day. And I think that's the difference. It's just a natural part of our day. And business models, either we're speeding up the model that we have, or the models are actually shifting because they need to. So we've got the quicker, faster, cheaper, greener, easier. So absolutely, that's just doing the things that we have done, but we're optimizing them, right? Through the services or the products, we're optimizing. The other side of it, if you want, are we doing the old things, but we're now doing them differently? So I think that's where that transition bridge is for organizations that are becoming digital. We're doing the old things, but we're doing it differently. Then you've got the others that they are super. They say, you know what, we're just going to do the things we couldn't do before because we've got the ability to do it, which that doesn't mean you should do it. It just means we have the ability to do it. There's still a choice to be made. And then there's we're doing things that we couldn't have even imagined before. And that for me is the real exciting part of, if that's the case, what are we managing? Because it's not the product itself actually does something. It enables something. There's still a service that's provided. So whether a service desk exists or it doesn't exist, how are we still managing that interaction with our customer, consumer, client, however you envisage that, be they internal or external? We still have to manage that relationship, and that is part of the service, not the product.
I mean, I think it's fair to say we have to manage the outcome. We have to manage that co-creation of value, whether that's through a product, whether that's through the service. That value realization has to be properly managed. Otherwise, why would somebody use your business to achieve those outcomes? But Mark, I'll come to you with this question, because I know you've contributed to various other frameworks. And the thought occurred to me as Alan and Simone were sharing their perspectives. What about other things like corporate risk management and governance? What about things like, Alan touched on customer support, absolutely right. But what about supplier management? I'm always reminded of I think it was either a tweet or a conversation I overheard at a conference where somebody was saying, oh yeah, outsourcing is evil. It's absolutely evil. It destroys, there were software developers, it absolutely destroys the value that we as a software development team can deliver into the organization. That's okay, fair enough. Next sentence, we use AWS. I was like, you just outsourced your infrastructure then, haven't you? So, there's a lot of these other sort of functions which we don't see, but just because we don't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And if it exists, it needs to be managed. I mean, you've met my family, Mark. You know, you might chuckle at this. When my younger daughter a few years ago, we went out to a restaurant, and she was 5 at the time, and she said, "Oh, there are two types of people in the restaurant. There's the cooking people and the giving people." And I said, "Okay, but what about the cleaning people? What about the people who go shopping for the vegetables?" And she's like, "Oh, I didn't think about that." So what happens to these other functions as we put them more and more behind this digital interface, this digital veneer? Where do you see these functions landing or evolving?
Yeah, I don't know. It triggers the thought about how we organize work. Division of labor as the overarching theme. All very conscious, I think, of people organizing work in product-based teams, software product-based teams, multifunctional. So you've got, whereas traditionally you'd have analysts, designers, developers, testers, all different functions that interacted with each other more or less as a chain. You now see people in a good industry colleague, Charlie Betts, says, not that he invented it himself, but quoting somebody who said the product, a team is probably the most effective economic unit around. If you get a team of about 10 or 12 people, you can achieve miracles with such a small team. The trouble is when you start to scale things, what do you do then? What should you centralize? I think decentralization should be the default. But sometimes, you're probably in a decent large size organization, you don't want multiple service desks that people have to choose from. You want to give them the convenience of calling one service desk. So that's a centralized function. But where's the interface in work between what you do in that product team and what you give to the centralized team? And is that a fixed interface or is that a dynamic one, depending on how well the service desk deals with more difficult calls? I'd either give more to them or take it back. But it really is, it's a fascinating, and I haven't got the solution to this, but I'd like to encourage people to think about that concept of how are you organizing work, and the division of labor. That's a fascinating topic. So what's his name? Matthew Skelton, yesterday evening, is one of the authors of Team Topologies, which is a very good book exploring how you organize work. He made the statement, if within a team people are passing work on to each other, then you don't have, with handovers within a team, then he says you don't have a team. Hang on, that's interesting. So what's a team? But this is really a fascinating area. One of the central things that we do have to think about in these kind of organizations.
Absolutely.
I can continue that for a moment, Mark. I was going to say, we live in this age. Okay, so COVID's a special case and it's accelerated everything. But generally, we live in this age which is becoming digital. And, Mark, you're just brave enough to say you don't have the answers. I think the thing is, as we move to a digitally based economy, all the existing roles are kind of up in the air and we don't know how to put them together. We don't know what the right divide is. Should there be a divide between the service desk and the testers, between the testers and the analysts, between the coders, between the Java coders and the JavaScript? And I'm reminded how, to step back in history, those of you who are into art will have heard of the Bauhaus movement between the wars, the Bauhaus. It was radical at the Bauhaus Art School. All the students were taught all the arts. The first year, whether you were doing textiles or painting or sculpture, you did a foundation course on arts. And they all learned some of everything. And then they decided, where do you go next? And I think we're in that kind of phase at the moment. We don't really know what the future roles will be. We don't know where the handoffs will be, as Matt Skelton says. We're re-engineering them. And Mark used a great word earlier on when he said unlearn. And the problem is, so often we cling to what we think we know and what's brought us success in the past. And really, sometimes we need to say, look, I need to let go of this. I need to unlearn a habit because the world has changed. I mean, how many people on this call before February this year, thought the work was about going to an office and getting in a lift, and you've had to unlearn that.
Well, see, a lot of our skills now require the fact that we have to be really fluid in the way that we actually approach our work. And they have to be, and not everyone is as adaptable as that. So many of the competencies and the new skills we're looking for, either to help people learn or to bring them on board, are those skills that allow for that reshaping of what our skyline's going to look like.
Yeah, sorry, just a comment. I think if we're talking about reskilling, there's also a case to talk about not only the STEM disciplines that you study, but also arts and humanities. That, you know, we're dealing with human beings, and certainly lots of roles and future roles that we have no conception of. You'll still be interacting with people. And a decent understanding of arts and humanities, in addition to your core technical competencies, isn't a bad thing.
I mean, it's a fascinating topic, perhaps for I think an hour or a couple of hours worth of discussion in of itself. I do remember reading, you know, news articles or essays in the past which were warning against this singular focus on STEM. You know, government policies around STEM at the expense of humanities and arts. Because, you know, sure, it's employability, and we understand where these governments were coming from when trying to promote STEM as a way for future generations to continue to be employable. But at the same time, ignoring arts and humanities had other consequences. Mark, you mentioned team topologies. I'll also throw a book recommendation out there to the audience. And that's Unlearn by Barry O'Reilly. I mean, we've talked about unlearning quite a few times already. He's written a fairly approachable, readable book. It's not dense literature. It's an enjoyable read, and it talks about how organizations and individuals can build in this culture of being able to let go of ideas to be able to move on to the next one as and when required. But let's move on for our panel discussion. We've talked about a lot of things here. You know, we've talked about culture. We've talked about dealing with people. We've talked about organizational silos. I suppose one question that does come to mind is, regardless of us, the IT community in general, been talking about these for a number of years. These symptoms, if I can use that word, continue to be seen, continue to be manifest in organizations. Is there a danger that organizations looking to put in place these high velocity ways of working might be addressing the wrong thing? They're addressing the symptom rather than the underlying condition, as it were. And if so, what are these conditions? I'll go first with an idea, which is something I've been thinking about for many months. For me, I mean, my experience, again, we're all guided by our experience, and that's why we have different perspectives. But my experience has been that a lot of organizational design follows funding streams. So people at a very senior level, you know, whether you want to call that governance or executive leadership or whatever, tend to think of, I will give this much money for this type of work to be done. And then the organization around getting that thing done follows that funding stream, which is why, you know, in somebody's head, they might think we need to do A, B, C, and D, not necessarily A, B, C, and D together, you know, but we need to do A, we need to do B, and then funding streams exist to enable that, to get resources to enable all that work. And that's why we then start to see silos building up, especially as we scale beyond a team of 10 to, you know, an organization of 100,000. So that's something that I've seen, and I'd be curious to know what you folks have seen. What are the challenges that you've seen that you wanted to address with the High Velocity IT book? Simone, I'll start with you first.
Okay, the challenges themselves, I think a great deal of the challenge is in the thinking. We've been so used to working in a particular way for such a long time that we're not really looking at how we expand our capability in terms of our competency. I think there's a competency transformation that comes along with high velocity. There's a way of being and behaving that is going against what has been the norm. And in doing that, I think we need to pay attention to our resource potential. So we're not saying that these same people can't shift or move themselves either. We're actually saying we're evolving, and we need to foster and take in the depth and the breadth of what's available to us in terms of what skills that they have that are outside or have been unseen before because they've been stuck in a particular role. But as they start to do other things, we will see how much more of that will come into being. I think people, we're not trusting them enough. They are adaptable. There is a resilience that a lot of these our teams have already, and we're not talking to them enough. I think that's one of the challenges. We're not taking that in that breadth and depth of who they are and how they can actually shift that capability into the direction and the speed that we're wanting to move, because we're assuming that they are who they are because of the role that they've had rather than who they are as a whole person and can become.
That's interesting. Okay. Alan, I'll come to you next.
Yeah.
What are some of these common challenges that you typically have to go in as an agile coach to help solve, and why do you think those exist?
Well, Simone's just mentioned one, trust there. That's perhaps one that hits you in the eye when you look closely, when you think about it. We don't trust our people. And I've seen this for a couple of teams recently. So you take a simple thing like, the agile teams often work with requirements written as user stories. And these user stories should be short and sweet. But sometimes you find they've grown into these monsters, like a tiny bit of functional specification. And you're surrounded by these analysts saying, oh, we can't trust the developers, or the developers don't know what they're doing. And no, we need to trust them. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you don't believe you can trust your people, if you try and spoon feed them like that, then they're not going to demonstrate trust. And we all know this with our kids. I thought it was interesting, Akshay, that you started off that discussion about where the funding goes and where the handovers are. And what you were describing was a perfect example of Conway's Law. I don't know how many people on here have heard of Conway's Law. A gentleman called Mel Conway, 1968, he described this and said, organizations produce systems which are copies of the communication paths inside the organization. So because there's a communication path between finance and HR, the system you build has an HR bit and a finance bit. And you see this again and again. People start creating systems which are copies of something that already exists. You can call it the homomorphic force. And this is a hindrance to high velocity IT, because it means that people don't go for the best solutions, the fastest solutions, the most, however, whatever criteria you've got, the bestness of it. They go for something which is a copy of what's already there. So once you've decided the general form of something, that's decided your architecture really early on, whether it's your service architecture or your software architecture. So one of my contributions in the book is what goes by the rather provocative name of no projects. And it goes by that name because it began life on Twitter, and everything on Twitter is provocative. Hashtag no projects. And it was this movement of myself and several other people who started to say, in the technology world we live in now, the project model, where we do all this upfront work and we box it in with time and scope and all the rest, and then we build and we try and finish it. It's not a good model for managing the way we work. And in this context, the context of high velocity, I'll point out two things. Because the project model assumes that before anyone begins work, somebody has decided what needs to be done and perhaps how it will be done. You've got all this pre-work which can't be challenged. And if as you're doing the work, you see a new way of doing it, you unlearn something, you learn something new perhaps. You can't take these opportunities because it's been pre-programmed by the pre-project phase. And the second problem is that in terms of high velocity is that sometimes you spend forever and a day getting a project up and running. I've come across organizations that spend years debating whether to do a piece of work or not and writing specifications and project plans. All the time you're debating it, the go live date is receding into the distance. And if you know anything about cost of delay, which is a great phenomenon, you're losing benefit. So my solution is what I call a minimally viable team. If you have more than is minimally viable, you'll get more product. Start with the smallest team you can conceive of, which is probably 2 or 3 people, and license them. Just say, look, you 3 people, your mission, give them a mission statement, a goal. Go out and explore some new market, some new product, some new service. You've got enough money to be funded for, say, 3 months. In 3 months, come back to us and show us what you found. Tell us whether the market is viable. Better still, show us a prototype. Show us some trial data where you've put something into the market. Come back to us, and if it's good, then we can continue it. We can fund it some more. We can add people to this. This also allows you to back out of work, because one of the problems you see again and again is that companies suffer what's called commitment escalation. We spend £1 million on a project that was perfectly formed, and when it doesn't complete in the time, we give it more money. You say killing it. So part of being high velocity is then to close down the things which are not performing, the things that aren't giving you the speed or the benefits you anticipated. Close them down and put your resources into those that are.
Can I throw a slight challenge at them?
Yeah.
Because whilst I'm not disagreeing, first of all, but at the same time, I think this dovetails very nicely into some of the things that Simon Wardley talks about, the model that he calls pioneers, settlers, townspeople, which is depending on where you are in your product life cycle. So if you're in a very exploratory phase, your pioneer phase, agile techniques of experimentation, higher rates of failure, but lower overall risk exposure because it's small experiments that are time boxed and so on. That is an absolutely viable model. But when you decide that you want to take something forward and you need to start to scale it up, that's when you are better suited to or need to start bringing in elements of, for example, lean, because you now have to figure out how do we start to operate this at scale. We need to start eliminating the wasteful work that was perhaps acceptable at a smaller scale, but now is truly bad because of how much throughput we're actually delivering. And I think in the townspeople model, when you've truly industrialized something, that's when he talks about bringing in techniques from fields like Six Sigma to truly measure and manage and optimize the way in which work is being done. So I suppose my challenge, to come to the point, the challenge is, don't all high velocity organizations see that product commoditization curve in some degree? So any product organization, in my mind, any product organization has to be able to move from purely agile ways of working to bringing in lean, to bringing in that industrialized ways of working, and finding ways to interface all of that together.
I don't think anything you said really is contradictory to what I've said. I think what you're describing is a life cycle model that in the beginning, we want to take a high risk. We throw some resources, and frankly, most of those will fail. And some of them will succeed, and some of them we turn from explorers into settlers, and we beef them up in certain ways. And at some point, you need to move from settlers to township, and you beef it up. What I'm saying is, don't try and second guess the future. Recognize that you will go through, and you will need to change the profile of your team. You will need to change the way you're working. You'll need to involve Six Sigma and all the rest of it at some stage. But don't try and second guess what is going to happen in the future. Have confidence in yourself that when you get to that point and you say, hang on, we've got a machine operation here. We just crank the handle and the sausage comes out, then's the time to pay the price for adapting for that.
Right. Yes, I think a lot of organizations haven't understood their relationship to risk when they move into a high velocity context. When I was listening to you talk about, yes, we'll do have the minimum viable product or service, whatever it is that you wish to show, whether, the point is it viable? I think people forget about that one word, viability. What does it mean to them? What is that in terms of their relationship to it? Because I love my grandfather saying, only bet what you can afford to lose. And to me, that is lean. That is also understanding that, hang on, if I've got waste here, I'm losing out on a space I don't want to. It's leaking. I don't like that. So if we actually took the primary parameters of saying, if I'm going to take a bet on this, if I'm going to see if this is viable or not, how much am I willing to lose? How much am I willing to put here because I only have so much, rather than put it in some other place? And so we have to have a better relationship to our decisions. And once we have that understanding of what our relationship is to the risk and what our parameters around that in terms of our governance decisions, then we have our play space. Then we know how much room we have to maneuver.
You're absolutely right, Simone. I guess the thing I'd add to that is to say, we try and insulate ourselves from that risk by doing all this upfront work, by saying, oh, before we bet that money, we need to assess the market, we need to do some pre-work, all the rest of it. And we end up spending money to do all that pre-work. And in doing that pre-work, we've shaped what we're going to do. So I guess I'm completely agreeing with you. What I'm saying is, just move the pre-work into the phase of doing it. The first thing to do is to do the pre-work. And today, the tools we have around us, Amazon Cloud can give you a completely new service infrastructure in the next 20 minutes. The programming language we have, the opportunities to buy off-the-shelf services mean that we can move through these stages that much more rapidly in the early stages.
I think, going back to some of the things you were saying as well, Alan, I think I need to maybe organize another panel discussion in 2021 with the other Alan from AXELOS, which is Alan Thompson, who's as I'm product ambassador to ITIL, he's a product ambassador to the program and project and portfolio management suite of best practice. And I think we need to have a good discussion about no projects at some point in 2021. So coming soon to you. But Mark, let's go to you. So as you were grappling with all these different asks from across the community, you came up with, I think, a very elegant set of 5 objectives that, regardless of where in the organization you were, they applied to you. And for those who haven't read the book or taking the course, those 5 objectives are valuable investments, fast development, resilient operations, value co-creation, and assured compliance. I haven't gotten that wrong, have I? No, I haven't got that wrong. Was
Hang on. You said assured compliance, not a short compliance, right?
No, assured compliance. Was there a particular order in which you felt that these were conceptualized, or was it a case of, for example, starting with, as we do so often, talking about software and digital products, and starting with that development and operations, and then starting to expand the scope? How did that process work? Did you go?
Well, yeah, you could see them in a linear sequence, at least the first 4. Really, you almost got it right. It was assured conformance to governance, risk, and compliance requirements. But that's really something that underlies everything you do. It's got to be within the rules and regulations that's applicable to your organization or your industry. But in terms of a sequence, you could say, are we investing in the right thing? Do we have the right hypotheses in terms of, we've got a business problem, and if we do this, then we'll solve the problem? Hypothesis, valuable investment. Are you doing it quickly? Are you getting it up and running? Resilient operations, and that crucial one, which I think is a really key thing that we've emphasized in the whole of ITIL 4, not just in high velocity IT, that concept of co-creation, where you realize that it takes two to tango with between the provider and consumer. And you can't just chuck your product over the wall and say, we're done. We could get this could be a nice segue into the definition of done, which is often used by Agile and Scrum teams to say, when are we done? Well, we're done when we have a potentially shippable software increment. The key word is potentially shippable. It's on the shelf waiting to be shipped. There's no value got out of it until it's actually operational. And further than that, until somebody's using it well. So you could say there's a whole value stream or value chain, depending on which term you like to use, saying great idea, hypothesis at one end, going towards somebody acting on a decision that has been enhanced by information that, by the way, they got out of that great information system that we provided. It's only when somebody acts that something changes, that value is realized. So it is, and I think you mentioned at the beginning, are people doing the right thing? I think offering people these 5 objectives to think about in terms of where's the weakest link in your organization, because the theory of constraints suggests that you should always be working on your weakest link, otherwise you're sub-optimizing. So get people to think about, are we making the right investments? And crucially, is it within my circle of influence? Because realistically, I can be working in a department, in an organization where I have absolutely no say about the kind of investments that are being made. For me, that's just a given. I can worry about it. It'll certainly be within my circle of concern, but I can't change that. That's something that's got to be done at a high level. So you do have to be realistic in terms of what you can control and influence. But within that circle, think about, is my problem speed? Is my problem operational resilience? Is my problem with the interaction, which is the concept of service, the interaction, that intimate, intricate dance with the service consumer, in which value is co-created? So that certainly helps you think, help you focus your what's the next step? What should I be doing?
And I think one of the pieces that we put in to the book, which seems to have gotten some very positive reviews, is an entire section on ethics and the ethics, change to ethics that organizations need to grapple with or come to terms with. And I think, Simone, between yourself and Mark, and I think perhaps Dave Snowden, I think, were whom I saw were the sort of key contributors to that section. Is there a difference between culture and ethics? Because most literature in this high velocity space talks about the culture of risk taking, the culture of high velocity organizations. Ethics for me seems to be something higher. So why did you feel that we needed to pay attention to not only culture, but to ethics as well? Simone, would you like to go first?
Oh, well, actually, no, I'm going to ask Mark to take that first, because something interesting occurred when we were, I guess, coalescing. There's a beautiful word. When all of this was coming together, that we were I was specifically focusing on an area because of some challenges that were occurring in artificial intelligence, or machine humanity, as I like to call it. And we have the other side of it, I guess, or the anthropological side that has really built up. And then even since the book has been published, there's been some slight twists and turns. So, Mark, I'll let you talk about that bit first, I think, to give the context around why this was so important.
Yeah, I'd had it on my mind for ages, doing something with the topic of ethics. I think it's about 7 years ago. I reached out to my international contacts, highly respected people, asking them, which kind of questions do you think people should be thinking about? So I didn't want answers. I said, what are the topics you think people should be considering? And one of the guys, I learned an awful lot. A professor in the Netherlands who's now retired. He said, he gave me one of the shortest answers. He said, which of the frameworks addresses ethics in IT? And that was now 7 years ago. So when high velocity came up, it was still on my mind. I said, this is something we have to think about. People are, and in fact, people who've looked at the book know that I talk about five. We call them key behavior patterns. I like to give them the alias of 5 aspirations, things that the reader aspires to, things like helping customers get their jobs done, to help to trust and be trusted. And in fact, after writing the book, I decided there was a 6th aspiration, to do the ethically right thing. People want to do the right thing, and they're often hindered by an organization that think people will be familiar with the Boeing 737 MAX tragedy, where software apparently played a key role. You know, just imagine you're the software engineer, one of the software engineers who's contributing to that application, and they are. The question: are they aware of the potential unintended consequences of their work? You know, what are the risks they're taking? Do they feel comfortable in sharing their opinions within the organization? Have they shared their opinions, and has management listened to them? You know, and you can speculate on how things actually went in the organization, but it's just the person in question, the software engineer, is concerned with, am I doing the right thing? And that is fortunate. I've tried this. I've experimented with this within the DevOps community as well. I was at the 10th DevOps Days conference in Belgium, where it all started now 11 years ago, last year in November, and I did an open space on ethics, because people voted up front. You know, what are the open spaces you want talked about, and this is one of them. And people are concerned about this. So it's on people's mind. You mentioned Dave, just a quick thing. You mentioned Dave Snowden, who contributed a great piece as well as Simone. One of the nicest sentences in the 90,000 words that I collected for the whole book, which was brought down to 60,000 for the publication. The great sentence was, Dave said, just as organizations track their cash flow, they should also monitor the flow of virtue through their organizations. And that little phrase, the flow of virtue, I thought that's such a powerful concept of, are we doing the right thing? That's why I wanted it in the book.
Well, I mean,
yeah, for me, I was so excited about it. I couldn't believe when I went, yes, finally, one of them's going to talk about ethics. This is amazing. And what I'd been doing previously is quite a lot of research around the ethics of emotional AI and how we're designing our systems and that kind of thing. And at the time, there was very, very little out there. Only certain countries were developing their research centres and starting to look at how the ethics around this matters. And it's people were, see, organisations were still very shut down or locked in to measuring their employees with the same measures in a normal situation. So, yep, I come to work, I do my job, everyone's nice to each other, and that's lovely, and we walk away. What organisations haven't been concerned with is, where are the boundary conditions? Those things where ethics become blurred. What's the intrinsic motivation? How is that wearing away at what's happening within their teams or in the value stream even? Where is the ethics impacting as it goes along? As far as I'm concerned, it's always there. In fact, I think it's not even just a 6th aspiration. I think you could look at any of those aspirations and those key behaviour patterns and see ethics decision-making at the heart of nearly all of them. So we need to really look at where, we don't want to destroy what's happening because we don't understand what the impact of ethics is. One of the key things that I like to look at is how you position yourself as an individual at the intersection of your relationship nexus within the organisation. And you were talking about influence and influences as well. Where do you sit, whether it's in the structured organisation model or the looser models that have developed in the last 2 years especially. But where are you positioned in that in terms of your relationships? Who do you talk to all the time to get your things done? Where are the decisions being made? Who are you relying on, or what are you relying on to give you those informations in which you make those decisions? And how are you collaborating? Are you actually collaborating with purpose?
It's interesting, we're talking about purpose and decisions and ethics, but another way of looking at this is what you're debating is the what is the right thing to do question. We're back to that old chestnut, what is the right thing to do? And although we're talking about ethics, we're really talking about giving benefits to stakeholders. The fact that some of those stakeholders may not be people who are spending money, may not be using the product, may not be paying for it. And I'm reminded of a book I've been reading recently by a London Business School professor called Grow the Pie, Alex Edmonds, if you want to look into it. And he talks about the imperative in economics now and business to not just deliver value for the shareholders, but to deliver value for stakeholders, and how if we seek to, as he says, grow the pie for everybody, it may not be delivering money to your bottom line today, but you may be delivering benefit, value to other stakeholders. And he goes on to show that when companies do the right thing and take the wider perspective on what is value, that those companies do better financially in the long run.
Yeah, it's what we call a triple bottom line. We've got 2 more minutes. I think we've got to start wrapping up.
Time. There is a question, but I will throw one other book recommendation in, since we're sharing book recommendations. Something that you mentioned, Alan, just struck the thought off in my head. There's another book by, I think I don't read the Financial Times, but I believe he's a Financial Times columnist, a book called Obliquity by
John Kay. Excellent book. Fantastic.
And that is precisely the thing. If you're only going to focus on financial metrics and the bottom line, you will fail as a business. Instead, focus on, for example, being the best chemicals manufacturer, being the safest airline, whatever it might be. And by focusing on oblique targets, you will achieve what you're actually setting out to do. So it's a really interesting book, that one. We do have a couple of questions. I think one, Alan, I'm now thinking we may have to ask you to come back in with Mark and maybe some other people to talk about. It's a slightly wide topic, but I'm just want to throw it out there in case you want to take a minute to answer it. We talked about definition of done and expanding that definition of done. And of course, the new Scrum Guide has just come out, and it does talk about that definition of done. So there was a question about whether there's any comments from the panel about that. The evolution of the definition of done.
Done kind of goes back to your earlier comment about where the handoffs are and where the money flows. And at a practical level, done is as far as your team can take it before they have to give it to somebody else. Really, it's never done. It's not done when you've finished coding. It's not done when you've finished UAT. It's not done when you've deployed to live. It's not even done when a real life customer uses it. It's done perhaps when a real life user has looked at it, and you've then gone and looked at what they need, where are they at now, and what is the next thing they face. And one of the things we have to get straight in our industry, and perhaps this is where service desks have a role to play, is saying, look, just because we've delivered something beneficial to a customer, where does that put the customer out? What is the next thing? Because it's never done. Technology begets technology. At a practical level, done is as far as your team can take it, and perhaps a little bit more.
That's a brilliant way of putting it. I think Rob England on Twitter was saying something like, it's done when it's retired, I think was where he was coming at. But moving quickly on, there another question that has come in, which I would like to throw to Mark, because I think this was something that we grappled with on the architecture side of things as a question that we had to answer. What's the difference between digital transformation and IT transformation, especially in organizations where IT is essential to the core business, for example, an ISP? Is there a difference between digital transformation and IT transformation?
Yeah, well, the quick answer is read the book. We did struggle with this a lot. It's the interpreter, and there are multiple valid interpretations. What I chose in the book was that if you say IT transformation, the key question is, what are you transforming? So if you say, and I chose to say IT transformation is transforming the function that performs IT stuff. So it's transforming the could be development. I'm not saying, I'm including development in IT as well. So broad. So it's more of an internal one, whereas digital transformation is transformation of business functions using digital technology. Now we could get into the definition of what's the difference between digital and IT as well.
Mark, IT is dead. If you're still doing IT, if you're still dealing with cost centers, you are so last century. It's all digital now. It's all a profit center. IT used to be a shorthand way of saying those people over there.
Yeah.
It's all digital.
Yeah. But the thing is, digital what?
Don't transform IT, unlearn it.
Digital is just an adjective, whereas IT is a noun. So digital what? Digital technology. And
I would challenge people to ask the question, hang on, are you optimizing or are you transforming? Completely two different focus.
Yeah, no, it's language, but it's worth thinking about.
We have seen a lot of digital transformation which were more refreshes than they were actually transformations. So that is something to Alan, just that one comment you had, I want to unpick it so much right now, but we don't have the time. Damn it. So I hope that you would consider coming back at a future time. We are running slightly over, so I do apologize to the audience for that. And you can always catch this post on YouTube. The video does stay up. For people who want to reach out to the panelists, Mark, what's the best way for people to contact you or to find you?
LinkedIn or Twitter.
And that's at Mark Smalley on Twitter, if I'm not mistaken.
At Mark Smalley. Yeah.
It's not at Param.
You find me easily enough, I think. Yeah.
Fair enough. And Simone, where can people find you?
LinkedIn or my website is probably the fastest.
And the website is?
Just www.simonejomoore.com.
SimoneJoMoore.com. Excellent. And Alan, if people want to reach out to you and
all of the above, only substitute Simone for Alan Kelly. I'm on LinkedIn. Please connect to me there. I'm on Twitter, Alan Kelly Net, and my website is alankelly.net. Just Google Alan Kelly. You'll work out which one I am.
Fair enough. And I will leave you with this. If you want to see a really funny show, which was cancelled before its time, unfortunately, but that shows the contrast of people wanting to do the right things, but being constrained by this larger organization around them. There was a brilliant show that used to be on ABC in the US, maybe 15 years ago now. It was called Better Off Ted. I highly encourage you to check out episodes of Better Off Ted, because you will not only wince because everything that is there you would have probably encountered at some point in your life, but you will laugh uproariously because it's just such a well set up show. So check out Better Off Ted. We've given you lots of homework, book recommendations from leading thought leaders. We've talked about, and of course, the ITIL 4 High Velocity IT Guide. All of whom we've all contributed to the book. It's probably one of the things that I'm very proud of as well. Mark's so proud. He's got a T-shirt with the cover of the book on it as well. But thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to doing some more of these and hopefully having Mark, Simone, and Alan back with us at some point to talk more about high velocity and software development. Until next time, folks, stay safe, wear a mask, and wash your hands.